From HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 287, recorded live Thursday, September 29th, 2011. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this episode of the Startup Series, Scott talks with Alex Papadimoulis, one of the founders of Inedo.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we're continuing the Startup Series. Today we've got Alex Papadimoulis, who is a founder at Inedo, creators of Buildmaster, and he is also an editor at a blog that you very likely read, dear reader, the Daily WTF. Thanks so much, Alex, for chatting with me today.
Oh, my pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
So, Buildmaster and Inedo, Buildmaster is your product and Inedo is your company. This was a consultancy originally, is that right?
Yeah. So back in '03, like a lot of software developers, just decided that it was time to kind of go out on my own, and a couple other guys, we got to let's build some great software. So we did that. We worked with industries of all sizes, worked on small, big projects. Mostly some local, some international, or some national. But the idea was we just kind of built custom software, did consulting, and that sort of thing. At some point, we kind of got into, and I think .NET 2, when that really started hitting, we got into sort of some training, some coaching, best practices, that sort of thing. And one of the big things that we noticed was just a big challenge at all the places that we work with was, this notion of building and deploying, automation, making things are where they're supposed to be, all those sorts of things. So, being a bunch of custom software guys, we would go from company to company and build them their very own solution, cobbling together various bits, and this, that. And, at some point, we all said, we've done this now 3 or 4 times, completely from the ground up, custom, all that stuff. Why don't we turn this into a product? And so we had a good break, maybe 3 solid months between big projects, and said, all right, in 3 months, we will have a product. Turns out that was a terribly bad estimation, and it was a lot harder to go from what we thought was a good idea for a product to, where we're at today and where we should have been, at least a year or 2 ago.
And why is that? Is that just a story of bad estimating, or what caused such a discrepancy?
Well, I'd say it was a series of missteps along the way. It took a lot of time before we were able to, figure out how to do the right thing. The first challenge was that, our background was that of custom software. So it's relatively easy when you develop custom software, right? You talk to the customer and then you ask what he or she wants, and then you build that for them. When you're building a product, you kind of have to, be the customer yourself or try to think what the customer might want. So it was a lot of the micro decisions, like, wow, would they want to customize this? Should this be built into the software? How do we do this? How do we do that? So it was those little details that went from custom software, custom built, to a product, just like you'd expect any other, organization to have or make. And I'd say our estimate of 3 months should have been a lot closer, especially for the scope that we were going for, would have been a lot closer to 12 or 18 months of just, straight development time.
How should a startup or small company stay focused? Like, I'm hearing you say that you kind of got caught up in the little details, and I hear from a lot of other startups that I read about, like Dropbox and things like that the trick for a successful startup is to do the least possible thing. Like, do it really, really well. Do one thing or 2 things and really, really well. And every time someone fails, it's always because they tried to bite off more than they could chew.
Yeah, and I would say that we were definitely on the verge of failure on several cases. I mean, if it weren't for, being able to bootstrap with having a consultancy as well, we would have failed hundreds of thousands of dollars ago. But what I mean, and that's absolutely great advice. I look back at some of the features and this was, I would say, probably 8 months, 9 months into development. And we had a team of, I'd say, 4 or 5 of us working full time. 8 or 9 months into development, I remember thinking, okay, are we ready or start telling people about it? No, because we need to finish the module that manages people's configuration files. So then we did that a month later. Okay, we're not ready just yet. We got to put something in there to help them manage database changes. So it was just feature after feature, and we had a really big disjoint of just kind of developing this with no potential customer. We just didn't have a idea of what the market actually wanted. So, we went, I would say the complete opposite of lean startup and did a waterfall startup, which was just come out the gate with a giant development product and, which may or may not have been what the market wanted.
You think that lean and agile is the only way to do it when it comes to startups? I mean, come out of the gates quickly with something so that you're not burning cash?
Yeah, I mean, I look back at what we should have done in the development phases, and I think that the right strategy would have been to go with that. A lot of people talk about the minimally viable product, and some people are comfortable doing that. Others, want a little bit more than minimum, but definitely don't do maximum. Don't try to put everything in there, because as soon as you start getting users, and you're going to get feedback, and that's going to tell you the direction that you need to go. What we, our big mistake was really just not thinking that we could just build it, create the product, and then users would start using it right away now. So that was a pretty big gap that we had. To do it all over, I would have said, after 6 months of development, maybe, whatever, we would come out with a beta, tell the world about it, maybe run some ads, get some folks using it for free. Then start building more features. Getting users early on would have made a huge difference for us.
So how did you dig out of this? I mean, you're saying that it's a mistake. I don't know if failure is the right word, but you did this thing. And how did you decide or know that this was a mistake? I mean, you're going for 3 months, 4 months, 9 months, 10 months. Someone's got to be speaking up and saying, "Gosh, guys, is this really the right strategy?"
Yeah, and internally we'd all go around and say, and again, this is just a bunch of custom software guys, me, of course, one of them, just not knowing what we're doing, right? Of course, not doing research or this because, we didn't even really think of ourselves as a startup. We're a company building a product, but, what we did was, okay, we've got a product, we're fine, take it to market. Well, how do you take the product to market? You hire somebody who's really good at taking software products to market. So that was our solution to the problem was, we built a product that had, quite frankly, for a 1.0, if you will, way too many features. And then we just hired someone and hoped that would kind of solve the problem.
Okay, so you go out there and you hire someone, and this seems to be, when in a startup process do you know it's time to get a sales guy or a marketing guy? Like you're almost done with the product, and then you go out and you find the guy who's got the contacts and he knows how to cold call and come up with a strategy. Like at what point do you hire this guy?
Well, I would suggest that at the point that we were doing at the time was really never, was when we should have done it, because at the end of the day, who really needed to be responsible for getting the word out, for marketing the product, for getting folks to, at least in the early phases, to start using it, was us, the development team, the folks building the product. We needed to be out there at conferences. We needed to be, on the, writing blogs, just really engaging the community to get feedback. Once we started having more revenue and basically once we started having good problems to have where, we're spending a lot of our time, we're making a lot of money, but we're spending a lot of our time doing marketing. that's the right time to bring on a marketing expert, a full-time marketing resources once it's really creeping into your own time, and maybe if you want to scale. But we brought on some really good help way too early in the process.
So does that mean that they were selling a product that wasn't ready to be sold?
Well, the product was definitely, there's really two things, right? So the software itself was absolutely ready. I was fortunate to know a few folks and to reach out to them to first beta users. So we had 2 or 3 companies that used it. So we know from a strictly software and feature standpoint, the software was great. It did everything it was supposed to. It kind of met all the requirements, but it wasn't remotely ready to be sold. One thing that you don't think about, I should say, we didn't really consider is, when you put a software product out there, you need things like documentation. You need things like a website that describes all of the features. You need videos, sell sheets, brochures. So it was all that marketing material that we had zero of, and what we did is we just kind of overloaded the sales and marketing guy that we brought on. So it took, this became his responsibility to put together all of this materials, build us a new website, describe the product, help with documentation, and for one guy to go from 0 to ready, that took us another, I'd say solid 9 months. 9 to 12 months, maybe even more, to even be in a position where we're ready to put ourselves out there from a marketing standpoint, with documentation, all those things. So, so our take on it was, okay, well, we built it. Okay, now we got to spend a whole other year figuring out how we're going to sell it. So we could have, of course, done those in parallel and saved a whole year of time.
So who is paying for the rent and the lights at this point? I mean, you're describing months going by, and I'm just thinking of all this money being burned.
Oh yeah, and definitely it was. So what we did, and I could say that this is a good and a bad thing. We were able to bootstrap by having about half of our time being spent to, what we'd say the main job, which was doing custom development. Kind of what we used to do. So this I would say was definitely one of the right things to do. And I would, again, having to do it all over, I would absolutely go back and make sure that you have a source of income when you're developing a product. So we were able to pay the bills, get things done as a result of having custom software projects that we were continuing to develop for clients. So that's what paid the bills at the time.
Okay, and then what about the strategy? Like, who decided who you were going to sell to?
So when we started, we knew exactly who would we knew who our target customer was because, we had all been there before. It was teams of software developers, maybe, a dozen to, 100, right? Not the Microsofts of the world and not the solo shop, the one-man shops. So we knew who our customer was. And we just didn't know exactly how to get him. So, the marketing guy who we brought on and marketing and sales, he came up with a great strategy to say, well, the software that you guys have built is enterprise level software, right? It's software that, helps the entire IT department, so on and so forth. And it's something that, therefore needs to be sold, from the top down, meaning, talk to the CTO, then talk to the director of applications, then talk to this for a particular application. At that point, you'll be able to get in and make your sale. In his many, many years of experience working on all sorts of different software, this is how software was sold. It didn't, I don't know, I mean, from our standpoint, none of us were, executives before. None of us were, CTOs, but the idea didn't seem right, because we didn't buy software like that, but, it was something that, we bought into largely because that meant we didn't have to worry about marketing. We could just rely on him to do it, and we can get back to what we really wanted to do, which was just write more software. So our initial plan was to, really go from a sort of enterprise top-down approach, and the problem in many months later is that today software just isn't sold like that. The people who influence software, even big software purchases, are the developers themselves, and they're a big decision maker. So that's who we need to go for and engage, if you will.
This episode of Hansel Minutes is brought to you by Careers 2.0. Careers 2.0 is a new service by our friends at Stack Overflow. You're probably all familiar with Stack Overflow, the online Q&A resource dedicated specifically to programmers and programming-related topics. Well, the team at Stack Overflow created Careers 2.0 to provide you with access to great jobs and introduce you to a bunch of great companies that you might consider working for, even if you're not currently looking for a job. Think of Careers 2.0 as a programmer profile. It gives you a platform to show that you're awesome by featuring your proudest contributions to Stack Overflow, GitHub, SourceForge, Bitbucket, anything programming related. You can even add your favorite programming books from Amazon.com. Profiles on Careers 2.0 are free. They're easy to get started, especially by importing your LinkedIn profile. However, there's one catch. Profiles on Career 2.0 are invite only. They did this to keep out the spam and have a high-quality environment. Fortunately for you, as a Hansel Minutes listener, I've got your back. Head on over to careers.stackoverflow.com/HM to accept your invitation today. Once again, that's careers.stackoverflow.com/HM. I hope you like it. Was this the old way to sell software? Like, you said it didn't feel right intuitively, but you said, well, he's my word would be an adult, right? We're just developers, and he's the fancy, C-level exec, or he was important at some point in a company. I've had experiences like that too, where I'll come in contact with someone who I consider to be like, a suit, and I just assume that they're a suit and they must know more because they have a suit. Is it the old way to write software and sell software is top down, or is it just because of the category that you're in that this wasn't the right way?
Yeah, I mean, and I think, the analogy of, right, he was the adult was absolutely apt. I mean, he was at least 20 years older than all of us. But, I'd say definitely, software, let's go back 20 years, right, to, even 10 years. Software, even in our industry, used to be sold in this manner. What I think really ended up changing a lot of it was the fact that broadband in the workplace certainly helped, empowering developers to make more decisions, install stuff. Nowadays, if you want to review a tool as a developer, you just somebody tells you about it. You hear about it through word of mouth. You download it, install it on your workstation. Mm-hmm. If you like it, you tell your boss. Back then, you really didn't have, and we'll say this is, let's flip back to the 80s, right? There really was no ability to log on to a software vendor's website and download and install. It just, if it existed back then, it was really, really rare. So software was sold by magazines. It was, enterprise sales guys in their suits would come and talk to the CTO, and mm-hmm. The CTO, without ever showing it to developers, would just buy the next IDE or decide, okay, everyone's going to go on this platform. We're going to use this for source control. Even in bigger shops, developers are the ones who are now kind of pushing the direction of things.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that this is just that selling software has evolved, and the top-down for developer tools is not the way.
Yeah, I think it's a pendulum that's swung in the favor of developers. There's some negative consequences to empowering developers like this. Mm-hmm. One of the consequences is that you pay a developer, if you're the average software shop, to write software that delivers business value. when, your dev guy spends, weeks of time trying out new software that really doesn't add to value, and, just with something he happened to hear about, it could have some longer term impacts of the organization and companies, especially with let's take a brand new technology or a new development framework, something like that. Mm-hmm. Jumping onto a new tool every year means that you're now going to have, after 15 years, 15 different types of development styles, tools, or practices. So, I think one of these years, maybe a decade from now, it'll swing back and, developers won't be the ones, especially at the larger companies, kind of pushing this change. But, the world we're in now, developers are definitely the ones who you need to engage with your software and get them to, start using.
Right. So how long did you go in that direction, that strategic direction, until you realized that it was a bad idea?
I'd say about, maybe about 6 months. It was about 6 months, and, what really opened our eyes was that, against, the adults, if you will, the suits, our marketing executive, against his advice, we said, we would like to have a presence at at a developer conference. There's one, Code Mash, which is, pretty close to us here in Cleveland. We said, okay, we'd like to, so we did that. We didn't have a very good presence at all, but what it showed was that people really, we got there, we were able to demo the software, and, the level of, the results, if you will, the people who were very interested, the people who said, wow, this is really cool. How do we get this? Mm-hmm. The sheer numbers from that single event, which was, 2 or 3 days or so, was, I would say, a magnitude greater in activity than what we were able to get through the traditional methods, if you will, over the course of 6 months plus. That's what really opened up our eyes to say, what, maybe we're going in the wrong direction from a marketing standpoint. Maybe we need to kind of take control of this ourselves.
Mm. So in all of this, during this entire process, the inception of this startup and the goods and the bads, when did this blog of yours start, and how did that relate into the larger scope of things?
So, the Daily WTF has been around for, almost as long as Inedo has. But, it's always been sort of my nights and weekends hobby project, right? It's a lot of fun to do. And, I enjoy it a lot, but it never was really integrated into the business. Some bloggers will constantly blog about, their day job. It just never fit in too much with WTF. Every now and then, I'll mention, oh, by the way, here's what I do all day long. But, so I'd say WTF was a simultaneous, process. It got a life of its own, really took off in a short while, and, kind of went on its own path, if you will, pretty separate from, where Inedo went.
Okay, so it wasn't bringing in revenue to the company. It wasn't associated with the company in any fundamental way.
Not at all. And still to this day, there's, about the only relation is, if I, for whatever reason, couldn't spend half of my evening working on the daily, WTF for the next day or whatever, maybe I'll just take a morning and spend some time there. But, that's about it. There's very little relationship between, the blog and, and Inedo. I think in retrospect that was something that had I, again, playing back what probably would have been a much better strategic direction, going back to when we started developing the project, after 6 months, once we had something people could actually download and try and everything, we should have mentioned that at 6 months. I could have done a post and said, hey, everyone, this is what it is. Check it out. We think it's pretty cool. And I don't think the readers would have minded. I don't think it would have been something that would have gotten in the way of the other content. And it's kind of interesting to see what folks do during their day. And we certainly think we have a pretty exciting product. So why not go out there and share it?
I'm actually a little surprised that you're doing a startup in the daytime and you're working on an already successful blog at night, and it didn't seem immediately obvious to use the one to exploit the other.
Yeah, it was always something, I don't know if it was afraid of selling out or for whatever reason, it just never clicked. It's like the most obvious thing in the world. But when we were in the, year and a half of developing with no customers, or the, year and a half of marketing in the completely wrong direction, it never really occurred to us that we have a huge, that Inedo has access to a huge development audience. And, why don't we tap into that audience? So strategically, another pretty big mistake not to leverage or exploit or whatever the folks in the community that we knew already.
Mm. So what's the direction now? I mean, do you think that you're still a startup, or have you reached success, and when do you stop being a startup and start being a real life company?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that since we kind of got out of our 3-year funk, if you will, and started realizing that we need to take things in a new direction. That's when I really consider that we were starting fresh, starting new. So, we had to do all the things that a normal startup would have to do. We had, I'd say, a product that was really, really far developed, but it didn't have an installer, right? Because if you just go to someone's site and install it, what do you need an installer for? It's just a .NET application. So we had to build an installer. We had to build a website. We had to, a website where you can request keys and do that. We had to develop a free version of the software, not only a trial. Then we wanted to come out with what a lot of folks are doing, a free version, right? We have a free version that can, that has 5 users, 10 apps, that sort of thing. So all these steps were things that, just about every other startup would have to do in our position. And that's really been the direction that we've been going in the past, I'd say about a year now is where we're at. So I consider ourselves a startup because we're just finally now starting to get the word out there. I mean, before nobody was talking about our product, nobody knew about it. Now we're starting to see people are just searching for it. People are coming to the site. We're getting support questions from people we've never met before. So I'd say we are we're in the early phases of kind of pushing this big boulder up a hill. Again, where we should have been 3 years ago, 2 years ago. I'd say yeah. I'd say yes. I think we still are a startup in that sense.
Do you have a sense of when you'll stop being? Like when's you wake up on a Tuesday and you go, all right, we're not a startup anymore because we know where our revenue is going to come for the next year, or when do you officially graduate?
I think that what you said. I know we know where our revenues are going to come from the next year is a good mark. At that point, once you're a fully sustainable from your software, have a ability to grow. Or I'd say a good, not only know where your revenues are, but know how you're going to grow the organization. I'd say at that point is when you start becoming a startup. Maybe when you have to start hiring support staff. To me, that's another big sign. When you're no longer just a team of developers, muddling through. When we need to start hiring, a sales staff, a marketing staff, people like that. I think that's when and it's a slow transition. I don't think you just wake up one day and hey, we're no longer a startup. I think that's it. Or, the other way is maybe when our BizSpark subscription runs out, that's when we officially are no longer a startup. So
when you have to start paying
like
Microsoft, when you have to start paying Microsoft for licensing, you're officially not a startup.
Right. So maybe that's what it is, too. But no, I think it's a slow transition. But even some of the big we'll say mid-sized software companies out there, I think you absolutely need to never lose your startup mindset. And the startup mindset is that, you need to take control of what you're doing and really understand all aspects of it. It's not like you can't, build an organization where you, as a founder, as an executive, as a leader in the company, are just a cog and you just do your part and hope somebody else does their part. You really need to take ownership and, get other people to, you need to understand what they're doing and very possibly do it yourself.
Yeah, I think that's the best advice. Stay lean, stay hungry is the way to be successful. And, people always talk about Microsoft or Apple or Amazon, and when they do something great, they say, yeah, they're getting the startup mentality back. They're starting to think about being more lean. And when they do something wrong, they always compare them to IBM or some big giant monolith.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what it is. The biggest thing, I would say the biggest difference that I think any startup could make is, if they're familiar with the principles of agile software development, which I would say any developer wanting to start a company would be very familiar with the concepts of agile. Those need to be applied to all aspects of your business. Try something small from a marketing standpoint. See how that works, and then measure the results and do something different. If you're just doing the same thing again and again, that means that you're not trying to do better, which is not the direction that you want to go. Or you could be just doing the wrong thing. And that was a big mistake that we made for so many years, was just we never validated that how we had spent the last 3 months was the best way to spend the last 3 months. We should have looked at it not on a quarterly basis, on a maybe even a weekly basis to say, did we do the right thing last week? Are we on the right direction? So shorter increments for a lot of things.
Good advice. Well, I appreciate you sharing your success and also your failures with us today. No,
it's been my pleasure, and I think we're still working on that success thing. The biggest challenge, and the other folks on the startup podcast, especially on the startup series, especially Kendall, talked a lot about the challenges of marketing, getting the word out, and that's really where we're at right now. We're fortunate to be, I'd say literally years ahead in development, but, at the same time, we're years behind in marketing. They really should align, and that's a pretty important thing to do.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex Papadimoulis from Inedo. And people can check out Inedo.com and also the Daily WTF. We'll put links to all of that on the show notes. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes. We'll see you again next week.